If we flash forward now to the weeks leading up to March 2026, Israeli intelligence is looking at Ali Khamenei, and they're looking at the advanced nuclear enrichment levels. They're tracking the solid fuel missiles moving into launch positions. They're hearing the rhetoric, and they're flashing back directly to the tragedy, the agony, the psychological thorn in the flesh of 1973. And the leadership is sitting in the Cairo, Israeli's version of the Pentagon. And they're thinking, we can't afford to be wrong again. There's a lot of stuff that is unknown. There's a lot of algebra going on. There's a lot of maybes.
We're feeling a lot of that maybe situation, weren't we, when the sirens went off? It was a bit of a pandemonium of information, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I remember the sirens going off and phone starts going. There's these WhatsApp messages, voice notes, news feeds. And all the while we're hearing these interceptions ahead. We're waiting for the next siren. We're like in the midst of what's going on. The picture is just blurred. So think of that in the decision rooms. It's like impossible decisions.
But because of the existential lack of foundation, what we talked about, strategic depth, history, rhyming, as it were, they're in a very different and difficult situation because you're under pressure and you need to make sense now.
Yeah, and that making sense of now is where the stakes are existential, aren't they? The information, even though it's incomplete, the consequences of getting the pattern wrong are unthinkable. It's such a pressure in the Cairo. And
it's Cairo. It's Curia.
Curia, sorry. We've got the pronunciation wrong there. Yeah, so what I'm saying is the patterns repeating, and these are very familiar circumstances to the ghost of 1973. And this is when we come to our next interesting seeing, this, what we want to call the window of opportunity.
Yeah, and this connects to a broader overarching strategic pattern in the history of Israel. And it goes all the way back to 1948 when it was founded. There's this kind of like idea of this window of opportunity that they've experienced on a cyclical level. So since 1948, Israel has operated on this deeply held belief that the history does not grant them long, stable, peaceful epochs to carefully plan their survival. History only offers them these really incredibly narrow, fleeting windows. And if you look at 1948, the establishment of the state, there was this kind of momentary bizarre alignment of post-Holocaust global moral momentum. You had the British Empire that really is exhausted, and it withdrew their mandate from Palestine. And crucially, you had that brief moment where both the United States and the Soviet Union, they supported this partition plan. And it was like this kind of fleeting geopolitical anomaly. And David Ben-Gurion, the Prime Minister at the time, and the early leadership of the country knew that declaring independence, it would instantly trigger a massive war. There were 5 surrounding Arab armies, and it looked like it was guaranteed bloodshed. The Haganah, the force they had at the time, wasn't like the IDF today.
In fact, on paper, they were very weak in 1948. They didn't have many heavy weapons, but organisation in that war was the key, wasn't it?
That's right, and they were highly motivated, as you say. They also knew in that moment that if they hesitated and didn't declare statehood at that moment, after they'd been given the green light by I think it's called League of Nations back then, if they'd waited for better conditions or better weapons to get themselves ready for the inevitable, or a formal treaty even, like that moment was going to slam shut for them. The British were going to leave, there's going to be a power vacuum that probably is going to emerge, and the international support is just going to evaporate. And the opportunity for sovereignty and self-defence, it's going to vanish entirely.
So they acted, didn't they? They took that risk, that agonizing risk. So the overarching template from 1948, when a window opens, you have to act immediately when you realise it's an open window. Because the alternative, letting that window close, is going to be infinitely worse. You're willing to trade short-term diplomatic isolation and really heavy conflict for the long-term strategic survival.
And that is the mathematics of survival, isn't it? Their survival. And it's fascinating how that exact macro level logic, that low tolerance for risk, that focus on preemptive outcome over process, it cascades all the way down from the grand military strategy right into everyday civilian life, doesn't it?